Falcon 9 is in startup. SpaceX LD, go for launch.
So with the launch director's final go for launch, Falcon 9 is in startup. All systems go for today's launch attempt. We're going to watch as Falcon 9 takes Amazonas Nexus to orbit.
30 seconds. Seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Lift off. Stage 1 propulsion is nominal.
We're at T plus 30 seconds into flight. Falcon 9 successfully lifting off from Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, and we're carrying the Amazonas Nexus payload on board. Now we've begun tilting the engine, that's called gimbaling, and we've begun to turn the rocket horizontally away from
Power
the
and telemetry
pad.
nominal.
That is called a gravity turn. And we're still going up, but we're also heading away horizontally from the launch pad. We just throttled down the Merlin 1D engines in preparation for our next event. That's the point of maximum aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle, point of highest stresses during ascent.
Max Q.
So with that, we are through the point of highest stresses on Falcon 9. Now the next major milestone will be coming up at around the T plus 2 minute and 30 mark. That'll be main engine cutoff, followed by stage separation, and then SECO.
MVAC engine chill.
Excuse me, and second engine start number 1. Now, I talked a little bit earlier about the gravity turn. Part of the reason why we do that maneuver is to pick up velocity. A rocket has to go about 17,500 miles an hour horizontally in order to avoid being pulled back down to Earth. And that's why these next 3 events are pretty important. MECO is where we shut down all 9 of the Merlin 1D engines in preparation for stage separation. That's where the first and second stages will separate. And then we'll start up that Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage for second engine start number 1. It's ultimately the Merlin vacuum and the second stage that will carry the Amazonas Nexus satellite into orbit around our planet. So again, those 3 events coming up in just under 10 seconds.
Main engine cutoff.
Acquisition of signal Bermuda. Stage separation confirmed.
MVAC ignition.
Great views. On the left-hand side of your screen, we're looking up through the inner stage at the second stage. And we've got a view here on the right-hand side of our screen of the Merlin vacuum engine starting its burn. This burn will continue about until the T plus 8 minute mark. Next major milestone will be fairing separation on the second stage. That coming up at about T plus 3.5 minutes. Now that we are outside of most of the atmosphere, we don't need to carry the weight of those fairing halves. So we'll jettison them back to Earth for attempted recovery and reuse on a future mission.
Fairing separation confirmed.
Great views from the top of the second stage. You can see that the fairings have separated. Once again, we'll be attempting to recover these fairing halves for use on a future mission with a recovery vessel named Bob.
It's just about T+4 minutes into today's mission, and if you're just joining us, we had a successful liftoff at 8:32 p.m. Eastern from our Space Launch Complex 40 in Cape Canaveral, Florida, and you're joining us in the middle of the first of 2 planned MVAC burns ahead of satellite deployment. This is a particularly exciting portion of the mission because we have 2 major events happening right on top of one another. Right now, you've got that beautiful view of the second stage engine burn. And coming up at around T+6 minutes, on your screen, you'll see the first stage's entry burn begin. For the entry burn, we will relight 3 of the Merlin M1D engines on board the first stage, starting with the center E9 engine and followed shortly after that by the E1 and E5 engines, which collectively work to slow down the vehicle as it passes back into the Earth's atmosphere. We need to slow down to reduce re-entry forces, which help us recover and reuse the first stage booster. The first entry burn will be one of
Not
2
trajectory for both vehicles.
scheduled burns for the first stage, and you can hear both vehicles are still on track. During the entry burn, Falcon 9 is decelerating by firing those Merlin engines, but we're still moving really fast. This causes the vehicle to fly through Merlin's exhaust gases, also called the rocket plume, and this deposits a layer of soot on the surface of the vehicle. That soot comes from the carbon-based fuel that Falcon 9 uses, and with each flight builds up a little more on the outside of Falcon 9, making it look just a little bit toastier. In the bottom of your screen, you can see that Falcon 9 is still picking up speed and continuing to climb on its way to space.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
There we heard the call out that our entry burn has begun.
Stage 1 FTS is saved.
If you're just joining us, on the left-hand side of your screen is the first stage re-entry burn, and on the right-hand side, we have the second stage on its way to orbit. We expect this entry burn to last just about another 10 seconds.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
There we have confirmation of stage 1 entry burn shutdown. Reusability is key to lowering the cost of spaceflight, which enables more investments in critical scientific research. The Falcon 9 first stage on your screen that is supporting today's mission is about to perform its final entry burn for the 6th time, previously having supported SES-22, iSpace's Hakuto R Mission 1, and 3 Starlink missions. Today's landing target is our drone ship, Just Read the Instructions, which is positioned in the Atlantic Ocean about 325 nautical miles off the coast of Florida. The Merlin engines on board both the first and second stage are actually quite similar, but they are optimized differently. The Merlins on stage 1 are optimized for sea level. These achieve approximately 190,000 pounds of thrust during both ascent and descent. Fun fact, at liftoff, Falcon 9's first stage has thrust greater than 5 747 airplanes at full power and is consuming approximately 700 gallons of fuel per second. By contrast, the MVAC engine is optimized for approximately 220,000 pounds of thrust in vacuum.
Stage 2 FTS is saved.
Which is, of course, the vacuum of space.
Stage 1 landing burn.
See that stage 1 landing burn has begun, and in just a couple of seconds here, we will shut down the MVAC engine on our second stage.
MVAC shut down.
There you have it. Now we're
Stage 1 landing leg deploy.
just awaiting confirmation of nominal orbital insertion for the second stage.
Nominal orbit insertion.
Good call-outs there. And hopefully you heard it through the cheers in the background.
Expected loss of signal, Cape Canaveral.
That landing marks SpaceX's 170th recovery of an orbital class rocket, including first stage landings for both Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy. Of course, the mission isn't over yet. The second stage is now embarking on its first coast phase. After the coast phase, we will light the MVAC engine for a second time at around T plus 26 minutes. We'll see you back here before then. In the meantime, enjoy the space tunes. .32 p.m. Eastern from Space Launch Complex 40 in Cape Canaveral, Florida. We also successfully recovered the first stage back on our drone ship tonight. Just read the instructions, which was positioned in the Atlantic Ocean. That marked the 6th landing for this particular booster and the 170th overall landing of an orbital class rocket. The second stage completed its first burn, taking the Amazonas Nexus payload into an initial parking orbit in low Earth orbit. Now we are just about 30 seconds away from the second ignition of the MVAC engine, which will carry the second stage and Amazonas Nexus into the orbit needed to deploy the satellite. There you can see on your screen that we've had reignition of MVAC on board the second stage. This burn is planned to last about 1 minute. And during this time, what we're doing is actually boosting both the second stage and the payload from that parking orbit I mentioned into our target geostationary transfer orbit for our customer, Hispasat. Just about 30 seconds left in this burn. And obviously, it's a beautiful day up in space. There on your screen, we had second engine cut off too, and we were waiting for a confirmation of good orbit from the nets. At this point, the Amazonas Nexus payload is still attached to Falcon 9's second stage, with payload deploy scheduled to occur in just about 8 minutes. And we do have confirmation of a good orbital insertion for that second burn. So while we wait, sit back, enjoy those views, and check out the space jams once again.
acquisition of signal. Part of B stock.
Welcome back. We are nearing the end of our mission today for our customer, Hispasat. About 7 minutes ago, we had successful completion of our second burn on the second stage. And
Expected loss of signal, Gabon.
coming up, we have our final milestone for today's mission, which is payload deployment. That's coming up at about T plus 35 minutes, 44-ish seconds into today's mission. Now, as a reminder, the Amazonas Nexus satellite will serve as a replacement for Amazonas 2 and will provide coverage for North and South America, Greenland, and the North and South Atlantic corridors. The Amazonas Nexus satellite has an all-electric propulsion system that makes it a lighter satellite and reduces the cost of putting it into orbit. And following deployment into this geosynchronous transfer orbit, the satellite's going to exercise a few of its systems to get into its final operational geostationary orbit. So coming up next, major milestone is payload deployment.
Payload separation confirmed.
And there is a great shot from the top of the second stage, watching the Amazonas Nexus satellite continue on with the rest of its mission. But that is going to end our webcast coverage for today.
Acquisition of signal Maldives.
All of us here at SpaceX want to thank our customer Hispasat for entrusting us with today's mission. We also want to give a shout out to the Range and Federal Aviation Administration for supporting today's efforts. Today's launch concludes our 208th overall SpaceX mission to date and our 9th launch just this year. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you again soon.